All right. Well, it is 12:30 Eastern time, 9:30 Pacific time. I know we have a lot to cover this morning, and so we are going to get started. First and foremost, thank you everyone for joining. This is a topic that I believe is incredibly timely and one that I'm personally very, very passionate about, which is something that I very much share with our three panelists today. I definitely want to start by introducing them. Just wanted to, quickly go over a couple of high-level details. So by way of very brief introduction, my name is Leigh Levine. I'm the Director of Talent at VMG. VMG Partners is both a private equity and venture capital firm that is focused on investing in the next generation of leading consumer brands and the technologies that ultimately fuel them. Part of the ethos of VMG is really investing in people across our executive teams, and that's something that as the director of talent, I spend a lot of time in. And one thing that has come up time and time again for our companies is this new, generational divide. And so wanted to really bring in the experts to help address this. And so we have Anthony Anesto, Charlotte Japp, and Erin Kate Whitcomb. Anthony is the Chief People Officer at Suzy, a Series D on-demand consumer research software platform where he has led the people and talent team for over 5 years. He is also the author of an incredible new book, which I highly recommend that you all go to Amazon right now and purchase. And I promise you, I don't get any kind of referral fee for saying that. It is called The New Employee Contract: How to Find, Keep, and Elevate Gen Z Talent. We also have Charlotte. Charlotte is currently the head of platform at FF Venture Capital, a seed stage tech fund investing in over 90 companies across the world. In 2018, Charlotte founded Circle, CIRKEL, a startup that aims to address ageism in the workforce by facilitating highly personalized cross-generational networking that connects people from all different ages through cultural events and co-mentorships. And then last but certainly not least, we have Erin Kate Whitcomb. She is an executive coach. She is the founder of Working Courage, a consultancy that focuses on helping brands grow, be more profitable, and adapt to business changes. And she is also the author of Good Work: Why Gen X and Millennials are the Dream Team for Doing Good When Collaborating Well. So welcome to our three amazing panelists.
Thanks for having us.
So one thing I just wanted to start off so that everyone can level set is we have all these different generations. So let's just define them, okay? So we have baby boomers, which are folks born between 1946 and 1964. We have Generation X, that's 1965 through about 1980. We have millennials, which is 1981 to 1994 or 1996, depending on who you ask. And then we have Gen Z. And these were the folks that were born between 1997 and 2012. So I now want to really open it up to our panelists, all of whom do not look a day over Gen Z. But what's interesting is that, each generation that I just named has a bone to pick with the one that came after it. The baby boomers complain about Gen X complains about millennials are rolling their eyes at Gen Z. And so I really want to focus on some of the biggest misconceptions that, exist, whether it's in the press, whether it's just in a Slack message on the side. Erin Kate talks about a conversation that she used to hear on the subway about, Gen X complaining about millennials. Let's talk about misconceptions and rebuttals to that misconceptions. So Anthony, maybe let's start with you when it comes to Gen Z.
Great, let's do it. So I think, well, first of all, when I think of the idea of something new that comes into an existing construct, right? So anytime there's a new idea that comes into our world, things that we're familiar with, we immediately attack it, like it's a virus, right? Like it's like, oh, they're wrong. And so we start name calling and saying they're lazy or they're this, they're entitled. So the first thing before I jump into Gen Z is I think, and I'm so glad that folks are joining this panel, because I think we need to first understand, right? Understand where these folks are coming from. And that was the intent. And thank you for the nod on the book. Happy to send 5 cents your way. I don't, these books are not profitable by any means, but happy to send it your way. But it's really, truly try to understand. So I think one thing when I explore, and there's so many things about Gen Z we'll get into today, but I think for one thing is, safety and security is super important to this generation. They have seen so much change in their lives. And I think one of the things we have to remember is that there are cultural norms, given where now, again, we're generalizing in terms of generation. So there's always going to be exceptions to all of what we're talking about today. Because I know the first thing someone's going to be like, oh, I know a Gen Zer that doesn't do that or doesn't care about that. Of course, there's always going to be differences. And we really need to get to the human piece of it, not just the label, but we're talking about generations today. Safety and security, very, very important for this generation. And you're not seeing that in the media. You're not seeing people play that out. And it's because of all the change that they've seen in their generation. They've seen economic insecurity through their parents. I'd argue they've even seen it in the tech sector earlier this year with the economic headwinds. They've seen climate change. We're seeing it, record heat waves that are happening these days. They see climate change. They see all of these things that are outside of their control to a certain degree. And so safety and security is going to be paramount to these folks. Now you have to do a whole bunch of stuff to make sure that you're clicking as an organization for this generation and what their wants are. And we'll get into that. But really the biggest misnomer is that they are looking for safety and security, and they will be loyal to organizations.
And so I think what you're saying is that the common perception is, that Gen Z is going to flit around. They're not going to stay at a certain place, but really they actually do want that level of consistency.
Absolutely. And everyone says they want to be social media, superstars and rock stars. That's another one. Like, that's just, they absorb social media, and TikTok is the platform of their preference for media consumption. But not every single Gen Z wants to be a social media star or influencer. It's really that ability to find a place that does all the things that we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes, and they'll be loyal, and they'll be want to work for you and want to stay and work for an organization.
Aaron, I see you kind of shaking your head there. What about the work that you've done when it comes with millennials and Gen X? What is the kind of constant, almost fear mongering that you see or hear, and how do you dispute that?
First, unmute. So there's a generational thing right there. See, I just did it. So I think the biggest thing with millennials, and this is like, just to use the word, I'm just going to say it right here. The word that came out when millennials were entering the workforce was this was an entitled generation. And I think that came about, and partly in my experience, partly in my research, that millennials were actually taught to self-advocate, to ask for what they want, to work in projects at school, to be collaborators. And so when they ask for what they want, we Gen Xers and baby boomers see that as a threat. Like, you don't get to do that. Like, you show up and you take what you get. You sit at that chair at that desk, and you use that computer. And if someone says, I'd really like a Mac, or, whatever their ask is, whether small or big, it feels like, how dare you? And so I think that definitely shows up generationally. And again, to echo what Anthony said, it's so important to understand the generalizations of this, and to really get to know your people as individuals, because that will solve so many problems along the way. They need to feel like they're participating in solving the problem, they came up in this world, similar to Gen Z, as, you know, you inherited this lousy place and we need you to fix it. So they don't get to fix it. They don't have the opportunity to fix it if they don't get offered a seat at the table. So when they come to work, they feel like, I finally get to try to fix this, or I want to work for a mission-driven organization, something that cares, an organization that cares about something. And so that's what drives them. And if they're not getting that, then yes, they will change jobs. And so that sense of loyalty is really to themselves and to their planet and to those missions that they have and they've grown up with and developed. So I think there's a lot more, you know, to some degree self in there, but there's also just self-awareness and being able to ask for what you want.
It's almost as if people are confusing entitlement with empowerment, right? So this generation is coming in and they want to feel empowered to make that change. Not that they are owed it, but kind of give them a chance to actually put the work in.
Yeah, and I think they were told all along in school, you know, you need to do something. And so that is the expectation that was put on them by the Gen X teachers, or, you know, baby boomer teachers, and not in a negative way at all. That's an amazing thing to absorb in a way that it can be healthy and produce results later in your life. But we just have to understand the information that was drilled into, for lack of a better word, into the students before they became part of the workforce.
And Charlotte, I mean, part of these kind of misconceptions is exactly part of the reason that you started Circle, right? I mean, tell us a little bit more about what you've seen when it comes to different ages.
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting to look at generations sometimes together, kind of what we're doing here with Gen Z and Millennial. And for me, I actually started Circle because of the experiences I noticed in my parents getting aged out of their careers at around 50, which is actually statistically average, which is really scary. So I'm really interested in millennials and boomers actually together, their parent-child, relationships, but they're also bosses and direct reports, especially our first bosses when millennials came into the workplace. And so when millennials were coming of age, this was the beginning of social media. And so there was this Time magazine, edition that came out that was all about millennials, and it said the me generation. And I think it's really interesting when you look at boomers who came up, after the war, after World War II, there was a lot of opportunity, there were jobs, there was money, they could buy cars, they could go to elite colleges more easily. And boomers actually had very different relationships with their parents who had gone through World War II and were a little hardened. And so they had a little more tension between them. And I think that they saw their own children as a new opportunity to be more nurturing. So we're seeing the beginning of the hover parent. And so I think a lot of millennials are feeling this pressure where they're being more seen. Their Facebook timelines are filled with all this self-awareness. Everyone's looking at me, my photos, what I'm doing. And then they also have this close relationship with their very high achieving parents. And so I think there's this desire to be validated, to be seen at work. They're very hardworking. I would say we are very hardworking, but we want our work to be acknowledged. And so I think that's a bit of a misconception. And then with boomers, I think that that glory moment that they had when they were coming of age is now seeing a souring where they are getting pushed out of work, like I saw with my parents, and things are not coming so easy to them. And there is a lot of wealth being held up by the older generation, but they also have a lot of ageism that's preventing them from earning and getting income, which a lot of them do still need. They statistically just don't have enough retirement savings. So I think there's a really interesting tension between those generations. And I think a lot of opportunity for bridge building there.
And I actually want to double click on something you just said, ageism. So can you actually define it for the group? Both, I think there is a kind of typical definition for what people assume ageism is, but I think it actually expands beyond that.
Yeah, so ageism is discrimination on the basis of age. Traditionally, you might say that applies to older people. So younger people looking at older people as irrelevant, useless, kind of past their prime. But I'm sure any of our younger people in the audience would say that it also applies to being younger. And especially when you look at that sort of like rejection force that Anthony was talking about with Gen Z coming into the workplace. I think we're looking at these Gen Zs who are the first generation to come into work post-COVID, and they have a whole different set of norms when it comes to etiquette at work, texting or slacking over emails or face-to-face or phone calls. And I've even seen it in my own office. I work in a very multi-generational venture capital firm, and sometimes as a millennial, I'm like, wow, I can't believe that, this Gen Z person had the gall to do that in the office. So we need to be aware of how our own bias shows up, and all of us have it. Like the ageism is pervasive, and even in the work that we're all doing, I'm sure we can all say we've held a mirror to ourselves and notice moments of bias where we see people, based on the generation that they're part of.
And that's something that I think is also so interesting is this focus on bias, right? So there's been such an increase in awareness of bias, all this training that we do as companies, L&D work on avoiding bias, and all of the huge strides that we've been making for diversity, inclusion, and belonging. But something that I've noticed is that doesn't always extend to age. And so, Anthony, as a people leader in a tech startup, how are you thinking about that as a concept? How are you building a culture that's inclusive of all ages? And how are you also kind of attracting a talent pool that's inclusive of all ages?
Yeah, so two big meaty questions there. So I'll unpack the first one. So how are we tackling? I think there's always this social good aspect of doing these things, right? It's just right. We want to build a diverse organization, and age is always the last piece of when you think of diversity, equity, inclusion. So it's making sure you incorporate. I think to me, the greatest opportunity is to educate and create empathy for folks. And then you do that through books, things like that, and storytelling, where you can bring folks in and tell stories. And I think it's so important for the way we handle it here at Suzy is we're a data company. So it's okay, what does the data show us? And then how do we storytell from that, right? How do you create and share experiences? It's so there's a methodology around DE9. It's called, I believe it's mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And it's like, look at yourself in the mirror. It's windows is looking into someone else's life, and then sliding glass doors is inviting them in. So telling stories super important. But I'll start off with the data piece, which is super important. So there's a book, and it's the scariest book you're ever going to read. It's not my book, by the way. Mine is second scariest. This book is Peter Zion wrote, It's the End of the World is Just the Beginning. And it talks about the demographic challenges that are happening across the globe, like literally collapse of economies and political and countries, because there's so many folks that are aging in those societies. And so they're removed from production. They're not consuming enough. And you're just predicting that these economies. So when I start off these things, maybe I do scare folks with that, but it's a business reason. The fact that you have multi-generations is a competitive advantage, especially since most companies now, their value, the company value is represented 95% or more by people. Not, everyone talks about code and IP, yes, but those are created by people, at least for now, until AI takes over, but we're far away from that. So if you're looking at that demographics and understanding the generations in your group, it's a business benefit. So that's one. That's how I influence. I always go to the business. Let's talk the language of business. Then we can talk about the social good. And then we can talk about, okay, how do we then do this? And doing it, like I said, with data, with training and talking and telling stories. And it's so great to hear from folks that are in the Gen Z population or millennials or boomers or Xers, hearing their stories, talking about, the stat that Charlotte shared, I turned 50 today. So basically I should be pushed out tomorrow. Not yet. I didn't get any notifications yet, but I'm part of that stat now. So it's really telling those stories. And I got to tell you, at 50, I'm just starting. I am the most confident I've ever been, and smartest likely that I've ever been. So yeah, I think it's a combination of understanding the business impacts, understanding then how do you storytell and bring people along and not coach at them or tell them, but bring them into the stories are critically important for this.
And when you do tell that story and you tell that story about Susie, how do you construct a narrative that you feel like appeals to all different generations? Do you kind of adapt your outreach? Do you do something specific on social media, for example, to attract Gen Z? And is that different than how you were to attract millennials or Gen X? Like, how do you almost think about your employer brand and marketing from that perspective?
Sure. I think what we can do is what we've done recently to attract particularly, and I think this applies to all generations, is we looked at the job posting, right? So the job posting, we're actually coming out with a blog post on this in a couple of days in partnership with the company we work with. But the idea is the job description, you think about the evolution of the job classified ad, it really hasn't changed all that much, right? Like from the turn of the century when we had classified ads and then the internet, like the job description itself hasn't changed. And I was thinking of how do we create something that is more interactive, right? So video, we came up with the idea of audio, right? The idea of including audio. We partner with a company called CareerPuck, where they interview a bunch of our employees, our senior leaders, and then employees in different divisions. And aside to our job description, right on the side is audio clips of that person speaking about Susie. And I think that it's never really thinking of the different generations, but creating a different experience that will apply to all the generations. I think it's trying to figure out the similarities of the generations and then focusing on there. So it's not like we have a Gen Z landing page. We try to optimize because I think that the major differences in the generations is what we dealt with really crappy recruiting experiences. Let's put my data in, then connect my LinkedIn, then it asks for my resume, then there's a cover letter, and then it asks me to fill my information out again. Like that's a crappy recruiting experience. Why did we had no choice. We just accepted that as the way, like when I came into the workforce, it was very much on the employer side than the candidate side. So I had to accept that. So now when we think about Gen Z and the ability to make sure it's quick and it's easy and it's super fluid and there's no friction, everyone wins. So it's not really thinking of too much generation, but how do we up level the things that we're doing now for all the generations at the same time?
Got it. And I mean, and I think, Erin, Kate, you say in your book that for this to work, the default starting point is respect. You just need to assume the best in the people that you're working with. And I think, Anthony echoed that as well when he just said it's important to have empathy. But when you are, coaching leaders on building an inclusive culture, what actionable items do you share with them? I mean, for people that are listening to this panel, what advice do you have for them to take back to their teams to really kind of make a difference?
I would say in terms of developing high performing teams, I mean, we can go back to the recruiting process, and certainly brands are even competing on the onboarding process. I mean, the onboarding process for me, one of my jobs I was in for 10 years, the first day, somebody put a phone list in front of me with a pen and showed me the phone and then walked away. And I was like, okay. And now, you have like a very robust onboarding processes in places where people feel included immediately, or the attempt is made at least. And that is part of the way that the landscape is changing. And also including leaders in that onboarding process is really important, and to bringing those people together one-on-one or one-to-many, and to get sort of to the point of getting that team in that high-performing state, the leaders really need to know themselves first. So in addition to having respect for who you're bringing in or who hired you on the other side, you also need to know how you function best at work. And there's a lot of talk about, if we take one example is DISC assessment, and people taking those and understanding how to work with one another. If I'm a high D or I'm an influencer, and I'm working with an S who is more of a support person and takes longer time to process, is much more collaborative. Those people need to learn how to communicate with one another. And when you add the layer of generational difference to that, it really requires some work. And part of that work really needs to be internalized, an internalized necessity on both sides to get to understand each other, not only for your personality, of course, and your work style. How do you learn best? How do you participate? When do you feel included, or why do you feel included? And when all those things are lined up properly, the communication and the productivity is so much better. It's exponential improvement. So I think really just identifying those points of humanity that have the extra layer of generational difference really helps to move things along faster and get much better corporate or company results.
Yeah, and I mean, that idea of sort of knowing how to work with people, matching people, finding your working style. Charlotte, I know that, such a big part of Circle is this mentorship. So how do you think about, connecting the different generations for those mentoring opportunities? What are some of the things that you look for where you say, hey, these people might actually be a really good fit with one another?
Yeah. So mentoring is something that does take place in larger organizations, and it can feel very corporate, and I think a little bit off-putting sometimes. Usually there's this way that it's organized where, two people are put together and that's kind of it. There's like very little glue or prompting to help understand why they were matched together. And they're expected to kind of like meet and figure it out and stay together. I call it like the soulmate mentor relationship. And I think a lot of us have that baked into our consciousness, like a mentor is someone who will give me all the answers that I need in life. But the way that Circle looks at mentoring, we actually see it more like a personal board of advisors. And so we don't believe there exists one soulmate mentor who's going to give you all the wisdom that you're going to need in life. We think that you can get some wisdom from older people, some from younger people, some from various sectors of business. Maybe you need personal mentoring about something you're going through in your personal life. And so we, structured the system so that you're getting multiple matches a year, because we think there are opportunities to have conversations about very different things with different people. And it's always interesting, when people join the community, they will maybe say, just match me with whoever you think. I'm excited to meet a lot of different people. And sometimes we have someone who's in a traditionally like older role, like maybe they're over 50 years old, and they'll say, I want to meet someone older than me. I want to get some wisdom and expertise from someone in their 70s. And there's so much value to that as well. So I think the very rigid structure of a mentor-mentee relationship is really outdated, and it can be really flexible. And I think, if you have 5 people that you can call for various challenges in your life and work, like that's a great situation to be in, and of all different ages, older and younger than you.
I love that idea of kind of having your own personal advisory board. And I think, a lot of people kind of do it ad hoc, but I've never really seen it like formalized in that way. Have you seen other examples, whether it's through Circle or even through your portfolio companies, that, has been a successful way to combat ageism?
Yeah. Oh, it's so tough. I did see, so as my role in platform, I do a lot with our portfolio companies. And once we make an investment, how do we help those companies be successful? And I'm trying to do a little bit of that data gathering that Anthony was talking about. So in a survey recently, I asked, how old is your CEO? And I was really blown away that it was so top heavy. It was actually predominantly over 35 up to like 55. And I think there's that stereotype that, tech founders are all in their 20s and fresh dropouts from college. I think there's a huge issue around like hiring in tech. I think that we've touched like lightly on this before. I don't think there's like a big solution yet, unfortunately. And I think a lot of like people that I know through Circle who are over 45 want to work in tech, but feel, when the job description says, ideal work experience is like 2 to 6 years. And then if you're over 6 years of experience, you're kind of too old for the job. You would think, you have experience, it's going to be useful. So I just think like making these connections and creating more empathy between generations of professionals is super important. I know when I was at my job at Live Nation, I challenged myself to have one conversation a week with someone from a different generation than me around a very specific area of expertise. And so I had to kind of like self-regulate this. And it was amazing. Like every week I had a really great conversation to look forward to about various different things I was working on or going through in life and work. And I think that's an exercise everyone can practice really simply.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think another point that you make is on job descriptions. And I think this hesitancy, I mean, I know, and I hope I'm not, outing my mom here, but she saw in a job description and she reached out to me and she said, it was a really interesting job, but there was something about a company and you had to be familiar with this sauna thing and this like table in the air. And I'm like, air table and a sauna and stuff. And I think that it can be really intimidating, so this is kind of a question I'd like to open up is I think technology, I think there's fears on both sides. I think the older generation is intimidated by it. I think the younger generation feels like AI might take their jobs. And so how do we kind of see technology as a friend in this environment and as something that can help kind of narrow the age gap versus something that widens it? And maybe Anthony, I can start with you. I know that you've kind of looked a lot into AI as well.
Yeah, so there was a great book written by two MIT economic professors called Race Against the Machine. And the book, I think, was published about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more. What they did at the time, IBM had released Watson and went up against Ken Jennings in Jeopardy. So Ken Jennings was I think the all-time winningest, or was at one point. I haven't followed it because whenever I watch Jeopardy, I realize how dumb I really am. But anyway, besides that, everyone got scared because IBM Watson won. And so these two economic professors said, hey, what's the future of this? And so they looked at it and said, you know what, there's going to be tech that's better than humans. And then there's going to be stuff that humans do better than tech. And really the equation is humans and tech. That is the ultimate equation. And I think that has taken me and my position around tech. So whether it's Airtable or Asana, at the end of the day, those are Excel spreadsheets that are in the cloud. It's a project management system, not unfamiliar to any other generation. It's just something different. And so always be, Rashad Tabakawala was a gentleman who I worked with many years ago. We used to call him Yoda, just full of wisdom. And he did a recent keynote here at Suzy, and he talked about relevance. People want to remain relevant. So, and technology is a way to do that. And we're seeing that with the proliferation of AI. And everyone's scared, and there's a lot of trepidation around it for good reasons, privacy issues, some real things. But like, just to be generally like, Gen Z coming in and calling them entitled or millennials, it's the same thing as fearing technology. You have to understand the technology. What can these things do? So for your mom, tell her to reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to her about technology and these things. And there's always going to be technology that comes out that's different than what we're used to. And by the way, it's awesome. Like the technology. By the way, we didn't have a LinkedIn when I came into the workforce. There was no LinkedIn. I think Erin had talked about a sheet of numbers. Like we used to have actually call people as opposed to email them. So there's always going to be change here. It's better to understand it. Like that's the key to everything that we're talking about today. Like research, be curious. Don't just push away from it. So I think those are the key aspects of it.
Erin, do you miss those cold calling days, or how do you feel like technology has improved has improved your work experience?
Well, I have to say, in some ways, technology kind of made my career because I came into a role in a tech company that wasn't using much tech for efficiency. So I'm an operations person by nature. I am a hardwired problem solver, and everything was just moving so slowly at this company. So I just went out and did a tech hunt and found ways to create efficiencies and streamline processes and set up a purchasing department and wrote a new travel policy and all kinds of things that really kind of made me stand out, and I'm the oldest person on this panel. And I wanted to, I was so excited by technology, and I still am. I love it. I'm always looking at it. And I think that there is a time when, like Anthony said, right out of the gate, that change, I guess this is my word, not his, but we attack it like virus. We see this AI coming. You've got the Screen Actors Guild is on strike right now, and all production is stopping because they're trying to use actors' images and without their permission in perpetuity. So there are lots of things that are intended to be a shortcut or to get somewhere faster or more efficiently, but they all need to be managed by human beings. And so our role in that is really, really important to keep an eye on what is the unintended consequence that that we could be up against. So I just think that technology and the people that we bring into our worlds are very important to our success. Have to do both. I love picking up the
Oh, I think we just lost you at the end there.
I'm back. Sorry. Carry on.
No,
I wanted to
problem.
add one thing.
Yeah, please.
Just in the vein of technology, I think the pandemic was really interesting in that Zoom became a big equalizer and remote work. When you think about people having different needs, like maybe you're a caregiver for an aging parent, or you have young children, or you have maybe a physical disability that requires that you live a certain way or in a certain place. I think that being able to work remotely has actually allowed, all generations to participate and work in whatever way is more beneficial to what they need. So that was like an interesting realization during COVID that, this digitization of work actually means that we don't all need to be living in the biggest cities in the US to have the most competitive, well-paid jobs, because maybe we don't want to, or maybe we can't, like we just have other responsibilities. So that's another kind of angle where there's a positive to all of this.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that was actually going to be my next question. And, we'll very much caveat this by saying that whatever you answer, represent your views and not necessarily the firm or the company that you work for. But I mean, remote work is still a huge debate, a huge topic as it relates to, generational conflict. Is it net positive or net negative?
Interesting. Yeah, I think so we're hybrid at FFBC, and our youngest workers like it and our oldest workers like it. I think it's been a way that everyone can, I think also in venture capital, there's some flexibility where you need to like take meetings and, go to conferences. And I think there's a lot of that movement. But I think the important piece is, if you are remote, how are you making sure everyone feels seen and heard? And I think that could be the big issue ahead, where you have maybe workers that are not as like vocal on Slack, feeling really disconnected from your company and kind of like maybe looking to leave and go somewhere else. So the belonging piece, I think, was tough even during full, 5 days a week in the office. And now that we're online and semi-online, you have to like go the extra mile. So that's definitely tricky. And the other kind of piece of that is with younger workers, they're seen as like really green. They don't know all that they're talking about, or they're missing some skills that they're going to learn. And so I think not having all the FaceTime reinforces it, actually, because you're not able to see them in action as much. And so one practice that we had at a previous job was once a week, one person on the team taught a lesson to the rest of the team. And it could be something personal, like I'm an expert on collecting Beanie Babies. And this is like a whole PowerPoint on how to collect Beanie Babies and get value from them. Whatever it is, it could be something very work related, but it just like allowed people to be seen and allow their skills and their abilities to shine. So things like that can be integrated so that everyone feels like they are seen and appreciated.
It's so funny you say that. I just saw a post. Beanie Babies now are being sold for like billions of dollars. So maybe we should all just like go into our garage, find them, quit our day jobs, and this will be a good point. But Anthony, I know, I saw you kind of nodding along there, but one thing that you brought up in your book, and I think that this is very similar to Charlotte's point, is that, there is this conception that the younger generation, might not be as busy, kind of takes advantage. And there's this debate between the quality of work and the quantity of work. And I think a lot of us, myself included, grew up in this era of you need to sit butt in seat until 6 p.m. to show that you are actually, being an effective worker. And I think that Gen Z, has really kind of championed the argument against that and saying like, I can be just as effective in 20 hours as I can in 40. And I'm just kind of curious how you think about, office work as it relates to that.
Sure. Yeah. It's, well, if you think about someone working an hour and getting paid per hour, it's probably, I would say, arguably the oldest business construct that we're looking at here. So this is going to take a lot to reframe this because it's so ingrained. I mean, we're talking about and I forget the historical references here, but you're talking like centuries of someone doing work and then getting paid for it in coins or whatever it was, or they barter or whatever it is. So the output is always and has been quantified by time. I will say, and this, I'm up for arguing any of this, is that you're not. I had a discussion on a podcast with someone and they said, well, I'm paying for the hour. I'm like, no, you're not. Like the hour time does not exist. There's no such thing as time. You're paying for the output of that time. So, and you can, it's easier in certain linear roles like sales. Like, am I paying my salesperson by the hour or by closed deal? It's closed deal like that. If it takes you 30 seconds or an hour, it doesn't matter to me. I'm paying, that's ultimately what I'm paying you for. I'm paying for the output. So I think it's a huge fundamental change that we're talking about here. And I love that, when I did research for the book and I was thinking about sort of my position on this whole employer contract, the macro view of this, the two worlds came together when we were looking at Gen Z and doing the research via Suzy. We used the platform to do the research on. We found that there was a connection there, that it wasn't wasn't quantity of output, it was the quality. It was what I was outputting. It didn't matter if I was, and folks on this call probably have had this experience. I sat next to an individual that came in early and left late, and they frankly had almost zero output. So, and they weren't creating value for the company either. And so, and that's an extreme case, but I think we really need to start thinking about that in that way. And if you do, it changes your whole outlook on the office. The office was a place where we used to come to check to make sure you were actually doing work. But if we assume that you were doing work in your desk and not, I mean, there were plenty of people that would come into an office and not do work and not be productive. And we also have to be careful, going back to your point about technology, when COVID hit and everyone went remote, there were some companies, I'll redact their name to save the innocent, that were tracking like camera turn on as a measure of productivity. Can you imagine if you're a software engineer? I don't want my software engineers on camera all that often. They should be coding, right? The output of code and quality of code. So we have to be careful, and it's called the Cobra effect of metrics, that we're actually looking at the right metrics. And I think output, it's a very bigger discussion, but it definitely has an impact on how we then look at the office.
And so how do you kind of use that to inform Susie's policy?
So it's sort of going towards the business impact, right? So looking and talking, whether it's the CEO here or our leaders, and really truly understanding what is the business impact? What are we trying to accomplish here? And does an office do that for us? And by the way, if you think about the real estate investment of an office, let's just talk about, a couple of 10,000 square foot office in New York City is costing you millions of dollars a year. What's the ROI on that? Like everything that we do in business, we have to, and especially in HR, but in anywhere, we have to prove an ROI, right? We need a case. Like if I buy this technology, it's going to do this. No one ever does that for real estate, but like what really return are we getting on this is pretty considerable investment. If you think about the most expensive things in your financials, people and payroll is always number one. And then it's space for the most part. And are we getting our return on that? So it's really looking at the business and then understanding the behaviors of our employees and trying to track some of that and seeing, are people coming in? Are they more productive? When we went remote in 2020, we had one of our best years from a revenue and productivity perspective than we've had ever. So why would we go into an office? Why would we change that? So it's always try to look at these things not from a dogmatic view, office or no office, or even like that. It's like, is there business impact and what's the ROI on it?
And I think, there's never going to be a one size fits all answer for that. And so that's why, again, whether it's for companies or whether it's for generations, it's, I definitely want to make sure that we're not generalizing, but more so just kind of showing all the things that you should be thinking about. Aaron, Kate, some of the most, kind of vivid parts of your book was your commute on the San Francisco subway and kind of all the different conversations and experiences you had. If you were taking that same commute now, would you miss it? Do you want to be going back and forth into the office? What's your view?
Well, that was quite a while ago when I was I've been working from home since 2019 with my own business, but being on that was really eye-opening, and as a lead time led by poor managers, and the entire conversations that were happening day after day after day were complaining about their managers and how their managers don't understand their lives. But in terms of working remotely, I think there for sure are some benefits, as Anthony is pointing out. This agile workforce is a new phenomenon. There were so many people who were running organizations, particularly in my generation or baby boomers, that simply didn't trust that if I couldn't see you, how am I going to know you're working? And would say things like, I'm paying that person, I'm paying them to be sitting in this chair. And also to Anthony's point, something I spent some time on in my book as well is that idea of productivity versus just being busy. And there's plenty of people who are super busy, but they're not, if we're talking about the new world of KPIs, and it's not that new anymore, but you'll find that those busy people are not productive at all. And so I think finding ways to set goals and be productive, whether you're in the office or at home, is really important. It's sort of a self-governance idea, and collaborating with your peers. But the one thing I want to say honestly about being in the workplace that you're not getting when you're at home is observing the interpersonal dynamics. And the communication styles between people and absorbing what works and what doesn't work. And that is one of the greatest training programs we get by coming into the office.
I agree. And I think, there's something, Anthony, you spoke about a culture score that I'm kind of blanking on now. And one of the ways that you said you measured it was through these interactions, right? Kind of seeing like if people were rolling their eyes, if people were excited, and that was kind of a way for you to judge whether people are happy. I'm blanking, maybe can you tell me the name of it? The Jess, it was like maybe a woman's name.
Not sure.
I can't think of the
Sorry,
right name.
I'm blanking.
No, I think it's,
See, blanking is not generational, by the way. It's nice to see that.
There you go. I think to Aaron, Kate, to your point, there is something about seeing how people are reacting, and kind of there's a very different feeling to going into someone's office and saying, hey, this was great, versus like slacking it or sending it on a message. Just like certain things take on different meanings. And I think that we're kind of still working on ways to influence that interpersonal relationships, in a remote or hybrid world. I wanted to make sure that we had time for questions, but it, would rather, I think, use the last couple of minutes just to really give each of you the floor. And this has been such a fantastic conversation with so many different viewpoints, but for the folks on the other side, if you kind of were to leave them with one takeaway of what, how they can be thinking about this topic, what they can be doing to kind of help really promote more of a cohesion amongst the generations, what would your final words be? Charlotte, we can start with you.
So many things I want to say, but I think the most important one is hire older. Like, just really look at your own bias and notice that your candidates might fall into one category, and really, really try to make sure your team is diverse in every single bucket of DEI.
100%. Definitely hire the mom that doesn't know what Asana means. I promise you, she's great. Aaron, Kate, what about you?
I think what I would say is, and my company is called Working Courage, because almost everything that I've observed in leadership and also dynamics with their teams comes from a place of fear, frankly. And I would say have more courage to be vulnerable at work. And I say that more to leaders who are of the Gen X persuasion, because we are more likely to see vulnerability as weakness. So I think, starting conversations with how are you? It's a very, very basic opening line, and how are things going, checking in and being a human before you dive into that deliverable. So I think just connecting on a human basis and not seeing vulnerability as weakness, but as strength will also go a long way.
Anthony, I know it's really hard to go after that, but give us your best shot.
Well, I think it's just, I say this to everyone, it's just be curious. Like, I think if you walk around the world and just be curious every day, that is a great lens. So instead of like Charlotte said, and Aaron Kate said, like, instead of just making assumptions or customs that you're familiar with, like, be curious about folks, ask them about themselves and learn about, don't assume, we have a value here, assume nothing, validate everything. That's more of a data focus, which is the second part of my advice, but be curious. And then, you as much as this is feel good to make sure that you have you're going to have no choice. Like, there is a talent gap. We've seen unemployment at record numbers, and the reason why is there aren't enough younger folks coming into the workforce. So you're going to be forced to look at folks that are older to supplement the workforce, to supplement productivity, even consume your products. So you're going to be forced. It's going to be good business to make sure that you have a multi-generation workforce that is optimal. And so if that's the only thing you want to take, that's the one you should take. It's going to be good business to make sure that you're thinking about these things in the right way.
And I don't think anyone can argue with good business. So Anthony, Aaron, Kate, Charlotte, thank you all so much for your time. Anthony, do we need to sing you happy birthday, or are you 50 today? You kind of just casually dropped that.
No, in May. It's
Okay,
past. So I guess I'm 50 in a couple of months, but let's round down for now.
All right, fair enough. Well, just a huge thank you to the three of you today. Thank you for all the incredible work that you are doing in this space. You really are, an inspiration to me, and I think everyone else that's been on this call. And I hope, everyone here, please check out all three of our panelists online, read their books, look at the incredible work that they are doing to really, promote this cause. With that, have a wonderful rest of the week and a wonderful rest of the summer, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.